The ranch had always been a quiet place, tucked between rolling fields and the whispering edge of the forest. But since the passing of Luke Harding's wife, quiet had turned into something sharp, something that pressed on his chest every time he stepped into the house. For weeks now, the silence had been broken only by the desperate cries of his newborn son, Noah. No matter how Luke rocked him, walked with him, or sang to him in the deep, rough voice he barely remembered using, nothing soothed the child. Tonight was worse. The wailing had climbed into a raw, frantic pitch, echoing against the wooden walls of the ranch house. Luke's eyes were red from sleepless nights. The stubble on his face had grown into a full beard he hadn't bothered taming. The crying baby in his arms, whispering, "I'm trying, little man. I'm trying my best." But the baby's small body trembled with hunger and grief he couldn't express. Luke didn't know what else to do. The nearest doctor was miles away, and the town midwife had been sick for days. He had tried formula and warm milk, tried every method recommended by well-meaning townsfolk, but Noah rejected all of it. The baby wanted what only a mother could give, something Luke couldn't offer. No matter how fiercely he wished to dot, as the night deepened, exhaustion pushed Luke past his breaking point. The crying didn't stop. The sound felt like it was scraping the inside of his skull. He wasn't sure where he was going, maybe into town, maybe anywhere. Someone might help, but he couldn't stay in the house another minute without doing something. The moon hung low. As Luke trudged along the dirt road, the baby's cries carried across the quiet landscape. A few porch lights flickered on in distant houses, but no one came out. People knew he wasn't the type to ask for help. But tonight, pride had long since crumbled away. Tonight, all that mattered was his son. About a mile down the road, a small lantern light appeared ahead. The soft glow came from the porch of Emma Wells' cottage, Luke's nearest neighbor. Emma was known for her quietness, for keeping to herself, for slipping through town like a shadow with a soft smile no one ever asked enough about. She lived alone, though no one really understood why. Luke hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to her since moving onto the ranch. He didn't expect anything from her now. But as he approached, the front door opened gently, as if she had been waiting for him. Emma stepped out, wrapped in a pale shawl, her eyes soft but sharp with concern. "Is he hungry?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, as though she feared stepping over a line. She didn't speak loudly, but the moment she did, Noah's cries faltered as if her voice alone brought a strange calm. Luke swallowed hard. "He won't take the bottle. I don't know what else to do." Emma hesitated only a second before reaching out her arms. "Let me try," she whispered. Luke froze. Her meaning was clear and unexpected, but so was the gentleness in her eyes. A gentleness born of a grief she rarely showed anyone. He placed Noah carefully into her arms, and for the first time in days, the baby stopped crying. Emma Wells held Noah as if she had been waiting her whole life to cradle a child again. The moment the baby pressed his tiny face against her shoulder, he let out one last weak whimper, then fell into a soft, hitching quiet. Luke watched with something close to disbelief. His arms, tense for days, dropped to his sides as though someone had finally lifted a weight off him. "I can help," Emma said, her voice barely louder than the rustle of her shawl. It wasn't a boast, not even an assurance, more like an admission, a truth she had kept sealed inside herself for too long. Luke didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to accepting help, especially not the kind she was offering. His mind swirled with questions, doubts, even guilt. It felt wrong that he couldn't do anything himself. It felt wrong that relief washed over him so powerfully he almost staggered. But Emma didn't pressure him. She simply turned and motioned him inside. The cottage was small, warm, and lit by the soft glow of a single oil lamp. A faint scent of chamomile hung in the air. Everything was neat, quiet, and calm, so different from his chaotic home, she murmured, pointing him toward a wooden chair while she slipped into a side room. Luke heard the faint rustle of fabric, then silence. A silence unlike the hollow one in his ranch house. This one felt gentle, alive. When she returned, Noah was bundled securely against her chest, nursing with small, desperate breaths that tugged at Emma's heart. Luke's breath caught. He looked away, not out of discomfort, but out of respect and something else he didn't dare name. "This isn't an obligation," Emma said quietly. "You don't need to explain anything to me." Luke rubbed a hand over his tired eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to." Her voice held a softness that carried more weight than sympathy. Luke sensed it. Then Nema wasn't just helping him. She was healing something inside herself, too, in the dim lamplight. He noticed the shadows under her eyes, the softness of her features touched by sadness. People had always described Emma as quiet, but Luke now realized quiet didn't mean empty. Her silence was full of memories, loss, and a tenderness she rarely showed as Noah fed peacefully. Emma shifted to a rocking chair and hummed a lullaby so delicate Luke barely heard the words. But Noah heard. The baby's tiny hand clung to her shawl as though anchoring himself to the first comfort he had known since losing his mother. Luke swallowed hard. The sight punched something deep in his chest. He felt both grateful and strangely fragile. "He likes your voice," he said softly. Emma smiled faintly small, almost shy. Babies always did that. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Emma's eyes lowered, her voice thinning. I lost a child. Years ago, the room stilled. Luke's breath tightened. Suddenly, everything made sense her. Withdrawal from the world, her gentle distance. The way she held Noah like a miracle she was afraid might disappear. "I'm sorry," Luke said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything all year. Emma didn't sob or shake. She simply nodded, her fingers stroking Noah's tiny back. "He's safe with me," she whispered. "Whenever you need me, Luke, I'll help." In that quiet cottage, something shifted. Not a promise knot yet, but a beginning. A beginning. Woven from grief, exhaustion, and a shared, fragile tenderness neither of them expected. The next morning, Luke woke with a start, unsure at first where he was. His head had dipped forward in the wooden chair where he'd fallen asleep. The soft morning light filtered through Emma's cottage window, casting a warm gold hue across the small living room. For a moment, he panicked Noah, but then he heard it. Not a cry, not a wail, but a soft cooing, a sweet, almost musical sound he hadn't heard in days. He turned his head and found Emma sitting in the rocking chair, Noah, nestled peacefully against her. She had clearly been awake for hours, humming the same gentle lullaby from the night before. Luke rubbed the fatigue from his face. "You stayed up with him." Emma shook her head. He slept. A lot. He just needed comfort. The word lingered, in the air, heavier than either expected. Comfort, something both of them desperately needed, but hadn't had in months. Luke stood slowly, unsure how close he should come. Emma didn't look fragile, but she had a soft, bruised quietness around her, like a bird that had learned not to land anywhere to suddenly, "You should rest," he said. Her smile was small, but genuine. "I rested enough." He woke just before sunrise, but only for a moment. "He's a strong little boy," Luke exhaled shakily. "Not since the day they buried Noah's mother." Emma rose from the chair and handed him the baby. For a heartbeat, their hands brushed, and Luke felt a warmth he didn't expect. Not romantic something, gentler, roar, a shared ache. "I'll walk you home," she said softly. Luke shook his head. "You've done enough. I can manage." But Emma insisted not with words, just by grabbing her shawl and stepping outside. It was her way, quiet, firm, gentle. The walk was short, but every step carried a silence thick with unspoken grief. Luke's heart tugged painfully as they approached his ranch house. The place looked hollow without his wife's laughter. Without the life she had poured into every corner, Emma must have sensed it. She paused on the porch, looking around as though trying to understand the emptiness settling over everything. "You've been carrying this alone," she murmured. Luke tightened his hold on Noah. "Didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Emma whispered. "There's just not always someone who sees it." Her eyes flicked away, as if she had dared say too much. But Luke didn't feel intruded upon. In fact, for the first time since his wife died, someone's presence didn't feel like pity. It felt like understanding. Emma stepped into the house with him and looked at the mess. Unwashed dishes, blankets on the floor, bottles stacked on the table, small signs of a man drowning. She didn't judge. She simply walked to the kitchen and quietly began tidying. "You don't have to, I know," she said, "but I want to." She cleaned gently, not like someone trying to fix everything, but like someone offering a small piece of their heart. Luke watched her move around the house as though she'd been part of it all along. She wiped counters, folded blankets, soothed Noah when he stirred. It was as if the house itself breathed easier with her inside. There were moments when Emma paused, the faintest flicker of pain crossing her face, a memory of a child she would never hold again. But she didn't hide it, and Luke didn't look away. Two grieving hearts, moving carefully around each other, sharing the quiet scars of loss. Before leaving, Emma placed a gentle hand on Noah's head. "If he needs me again, I'm just next door." Luke opened his mouth to thank her, but the words felt too small. Instead, he nodded, holding her gaze for a long moment. For the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. The next few days moved in a rhythm Luke had never imagined for himself. Every morning, just after sunrise, a soft knock would sound at his door. And every morning, Emma Wells would be standing there, shawl wrapped tight, hair braided neatly, eyes carrying the same quiet strength he had come to recognize. She never arrived with fuss or expectation. She simply stepped inside, washed her hands, and held out her arms for Noah. And each time, the baby reached for her with a surprising, instinctive trust. Luke watched it unfold with a mix of awe and guilt. Oh, because Emma held the baby like he was a blessing. Guilt, because another woman was giving his child what his own mother no longer could. But Emma never made him feel judged for needing her. She never made him feel weak or incapable. She simply helped because she could, and because something in her needed to. One morning, after Noah finished nursing and lay sleeping peacefully on Emma's chest, Luke reached for his wallet. He hesitated. He didn't want to offend her, but he also didn't want to take advantage of her kindness. "Emma, you've done a lot for us. I want to pay you for your time." Her expression changed instantly. Not anger, deep, quiet, raw hurt. "Please don't," she whispered. Luke froze. I didn't mean, I know," she said, voice trembling slightly. "But this, caring for him, it's not something you pay for. Not from me." She looked down at the sleeping baby, a soft smile melting the sharpness of her words. "This is healing," she said, barely audible, "and I haven't had something to heal me in a long time." Luke felt his throat tighten. He understood then that this wasn't charity. It wasn't obligation. It wasn't debt. It was a connection one. Both of them needed for reasons neither fully spoke aloud. Emma began visiting daily. Sometimes she brought warm broth or biscuits. Sometimes she helped hang laundry or straighten the nursery. But most of the time, she simply sat with Noah tucked against her, humming lullabies from a life she rarely talked about. Luke found himself watching her more than he meant to. He noticed the way her eyes softened when Noah smiled, the slight tremble in her hands when the baby clung to her shawl, the way she relaxed in his home, as if the walls held fewer ghosts than her own cottage. One afternoon, after a long morning of tending cattle, Luke returned to find Emma rocking Noah by the window. Sunlight streamed around her, outlining her in a warm halo. The sight hit him unexpectedly hard. His home, once filled with grief, was becoming gentle again, alive again, because of her. "You don't have to come every day," Luke said quietly. Emma looked up, startled. "Do you not want me to?" "Of course I do." He paused, swallowing. "I just don't want you to feel obligated." Emma held his gaze for a long moment, long enough for him to see the truth reflected back at him. "I come because I want to," she said softly, "because he needs me, and because you do too." Luke didn't argue. He couldn't. Her words settled into him like warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. They never formed a formal agreement, never shook hands, never spoke of terms. But a bond formed anyway, quiet, steady, unspoken. A partnership made not from contracts or expectations, but from shared grief, gentle care, and a baby who had unknowingly stitched their hearts together. Here is Part 5 explained in approximately 600 words. Part 5, The Town's Whisper, 600 words. For a while, everything existed in a quiet, comfortable rhythm. Luke worked the ranch, Emma nursed and soothed Noah, and the house slowly began to feel like a home again. But small towns had a way of noticing things, especially things that weren't anyone's business. It started with a glance. Mrs. Carver at the general store watched Emma buy extra milk and cloth diapers with a too curious smile. Then at church, Old Mr. Denton raised an eyebrow when Emma arrived late, with her hair slightly tousled from a morning spent rocking. Noah. Whispers began to curl through the aisles like wind through dry grass. Have you seen how often she's at the Harding Ranch? She's practically living there during the day. She's a single woman, he's a lonely rancher. Well, she lost her child, didn't she? Maybe she's trying to take someone else's. They didn't say it to Emma's face, but the town buzzed with it, and whispers, when repeated enough, began to sound like truth even when they were nothing more than empty wind. Emma felt the shift first. People's smiles became tighter, their greetings shorter. Some women who used to nod politely now turned away. She tried to ignore it, but the small changes hit her like stings reminders of her old pain, of why she had isolated herself in the first place. One afternoon, after nursing Noah, Emma prepared to leave when Luke caught her lingering by the door, her fingers twisting her shawl anxiously. "You all right?" he asked. Emma hesitated. "People are talking." Luke frowned. "About what?" "You know what?" She didn't meet his eyes. "They think I'm overstepping, that I'm here too much." Luke's jaw tightened. "Let them talk." Emma shook her head. "It doesn't work that way. Not for women. Not for women who live alone." Luke stepped closer, close enough that she finally looked up at him. Her eyes were shimmering not with tears, but with old wounds reopening. "I'm not ashamed of helping you," she said softly, "but I don't want to bring trouble to your doorstep or make people think something untrue." Luke's voice dropped into something firm, steady, protective. "Nothing about you being here is wrong, and I don't give a damn what people think." But Emma did, not because she cared about gossip, but because she knew how words could turn into judgments, and how judgments could become stones thrown at someone's life. Later that week, Luke went into town for supplies. He heard the whispers. He heard the assumptions. The worst part, they weren't said quietly. Like his life was a public story for everyone to dissect. Looks like Luke Harding found himself a new woman already. That quiet girl thought she was odd, but didn't think she was foolish enough to get mixed up with him. She spends more time at his place than a wife should. Luke felt heat rise in his chest, not embarrassment, anger, sharp cutting. Anger, he put his supplies on the counter and turned to face the room full of half-hidden stares. "If any of you have something to say about Emma," he said, voice steady but razor-edged, "say it to me, not behind her back. She's helping my son, she's saving him, and I won't stand for anyone dragging her name through the mud." Silence fell like a hammer. People looked away, some shuffled. No one dared speak when Emma arrived the next morning. Luke was waiting at the door, and for the first time, he didn't just quietly welcome her in. He stepped outside, walked beside her down the porch steps, and let the whole world see it. Not a scandal, not a secret, a statement, a man. Standing beside the woman who had given his child comfort when no one else could, it didn't stop the whispers completely, but it changed their tone. And for Emma, for the first time in years, someone had stood for her, publicly, boldly, without hesitation, and the walls around her heart began, very slowly. 2 crack open dot. Here is part 6, explained in approximately 600 words. Part 6, the baby's first smile. 600 words. The tension of the town's whispers didn't disappear overnight. But something changed after Luke stood up for Emma. People still talked small. Towns always did, but the cruel edge in their tone dulled, and Emma, despite her lingering worry, continued to visit the ranch each morning. Luke's quiet protectiveness had given her a kind of courage she hadn't felt in a long time. Several days passed peacefully. Noah's sleep improved. His cries grew softer. His little body, once restless and exhausted, settled into a healthy rhythm with Emma's care. Luke watched the transformation with gratitude that sat so heavy in his chest he barely knew how to carry it. But nothing prepared him for the moment that came next. It was late afternoon when it happened. Luke was repairing a fence outside, while Emma rocked Noah on the porch. A warm breeze drifted across the ranch, carrying the scent of blooming wildflowers. Emma hummed a tune Luke had begun to recognize, something soft, something old, something that seemed to calm Noah instantly. Luke heard a sudden gasp. Not a cry, not an alarm, just a small, breathless sound. He looked up, saw Emma frozen in her rocking chair, one hand covering her mouth. He rushed toward her. "Emma, what's wrong?" She didn't answer in words. Instead, she moved her hand aside and pointed at Noah. The baby wasn't crying, or fussing, or staring blankly as he often did. He was smiling, not a fleeting twitch, not a reflex, a real, pure, heart-squeezing smile that lit up his entire tiny face and made his eyes glimmer like sunlight on water. Luke stopped in his tracks, his breath caught, his vision blurred for a second. He'd known happiness before. This was something different, something fuller. Luke's voice cracked. He's smiling. Emma nodded, tears welling in her eyes. At me? I think he's smiling at me. She sounded stunned, honored, fragile. Noah giggled, softly a tawny, bubbling sound that felt like a miracle after weeks of nothing but pain. Emma's tears spilled over. She held the baby close, kissing his forehead with trembling lips. Luke came closer, sitting on the porch steps beside her. He's never smiled like that, he whispered. Emma looked at him, a small, shy blush warming her cheeks. He feels safe. Luke's gaze softened, falling on both her and Noah. Because of you, Emma shook her head. Because he's healing. No, Luke said, voice thick. Because you're here. Emma didn't argue. She didn't need to. The truth sat between them, warm and undeniable. For a long moment, they simply watched the baby, his tiny fingers gripping Emma's shawl as he let out another sweet coo. Luke leaned back, feeling the weight of grief inside him shift just a little, like a door cracking open to let sunlight through. "Yimo," Emma said softly, her eyes still on the smiling baby. A child's first real smile is usually for the person who gives them the most comfort. Luke felt something deep in his chest, something he'd tried not to name stir gently. So he chose you. He whispered. Emma looked up at him, her lashes wet, her expression helplessly tender. Maybe he chose us. The words hung in the air, settling like petals around them. Luke studied her face, the softness in her eyes, the gentle tremble in her smile. He didn't say anything, not because he didn't want to, but because words felt too small for what he felt in that moment. For the first time in months, the ranch wasn't defined by loss. It was defined by laughter, by healing, by a baby's. First, Smiland, the quiet woman who had brought it into their home. Luke knew then, whatever bond was forming between them wasn't fragile or accidental. It was real, growing quietly, like roots beneath the soil. If you want part 7 in 600 words, just say 7. Here's part 7 explained in approximately 600 words. Part 7. When storms come 600 words the next evening, the sky changed. Clouds rolled in thick and dark, swallowing what was left of the fading sun. Winds picked up, rattling the window panes and sweeping dust across the ranch like restless spirits. Luke was fixing the barn door when he felt the first cold drop of rain. Within minutes, the world turned gray. Storms never frightened Luke. He'd worked through worse, but storms with a baby, one still recovering, made him uneasy. He hurried back to the house, checking every window, every latch, every board that could shake loose. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by a roar of thunder so loud Noah startled awake and began to cry. Luke lifted him, rocking him gently. But the baby was already trembling from the sudden noise. "It's okay, little man," Luke whispered, though anxiety tugged at his own chest. Thunder rolled again deep, echoing, terrifying. Noah's cries grew louder, and then knocked soft, familiar, steady. Luke opened the door. Already knowing who it was, Emma stood on the porch, soaked from the rain despite her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her breath coming in quick bursts from the sprint across the fields. "You shouldn't be out in this," Luke said, hurrying her inside. "I know," she said softly, brushing water from her forehead. "But I heard the thunder, and I knew he'd be scared." As if to answer her, Noah cried harder. Emma reached for him without hesitation. Luke handed the baby over, watching as she held him close, whispering soothing words he couldn't quite hear. Noah's cries, though still trembling, softened immediately against her warmth. Luke exhaled long, shaky, relieved. The storm outside grew vicious. Rain pounded the roof like fists. Wind screamed through the trees. The house flickered with brief flashes of lightning that cast pale shadows on the walls. Emma took a seat by the fireplace, rocking Noah gently as Luke lit lanterns and set more wood on the fire. When he finally sat down across from her, she offered him a small smile. "Storms were always hardest for my little one," she murmured, her voice dipping with memories she rarely shared. He hated the thunder. Luke's heart squeezed. What was his name? Emma looked down at Noah, her fingers gently tracing. His tiny hand, Samuel, the name broke something in the silence. Luke swallowed. "Tell me about him, only if you want." Emma hesitated, but not because she didn't want to talk, because she wasn't used to anyone asking. "He was born early," she began, voice wavering, "too small, too fragile. But he was strong, stronger than the doctors thought he'd be." She took a breath. "He lived 6 months. Luke's chest tightened. "I'm so sorry." Emma nodded, her eyes locked on Noah, as if seeing both children at once, one lost, one saved. "Losing him felt like losing the world," she whispered. "After that, I couldn't stay around people. Their pity, their questions. It was too much." "Is that why you moved here?" Luke asked gently. Emma nodded. It was quiet. "People didn't ask much of me." Luke leaned forward. "Emma, you are the strongest person I know." She looked up, startled like no one had ever told her that. Before she could speak, a crack of thunder shook the house. Noah whimpered. Clinging to Emma's shawl, Emma pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Sweet boy, you're safe. We're all safe." Luke watched them, Emma holding Noah as if defending him from the storm. Firelight warming her face, her voice a soft thread weaving the room back together. Something powerful washed through him. Not gratitude, not dependence, something deeper. Emma wasn't just helping them through the storm, she was their calm in the storm. And whether Luke was ready to admit it or not, his heart had started to lean toward her, quietly, steadily, like a man finding his way. Home, in the dark, Part 8, The Baby Chooses Her 600 Words. The days that followed were calmer than any Tom had known in months, but it wasn't the quiet of loneliness, it was the gentle peace that came from knowing someone else was now walking beside him. Mary's presence had settled into the ranch like sunlight, warming a cold room. She didn't speak much, but her actions filled every silence. Warm broth left on the table when Tom worked late, tiny clothes mended without being asked, and lullabies hummed so softly that even the walls seemed to lean in to listen. Tom found himself watching her more often than he intended, not with hunger, but with awe. She moved through the house with a softness that didn't disturb a single thing, yet somehow made everything better. The baby, Lucas, adored her. His eyes sparkled whenever she entered the room, his little arms lifting toward her with absolute trust. It made something in Tom's chest tighten in both pain and hope. Mary didn't try to take the place of the woman he'd lost. She never crossed boundaries, never assumed a role. She simply cared, and her care had a way of healing things, without touching them directly. For the first time since becoming a widower, Tom could work the fields without constantly worrying if the baby was crying, hungry, or lonely. Whenever he'd return, he'd find Lucas cuddled against Mary, content and peaceful, like a child who finally knew safety. One evening, the sky turned a soft lavender as the sun dipped behind the hills. Mary sat on the porch swing, rocking gently with the baby on her lap. Lucas played with a strand of her hair, giggling each time it tickled his fingers. Tom stood in the doorway, unseen, watching a sight he hadn't known he needed. The woman, who had once seemed afraid of the world, now sat glowing in the fading light, looking as though she belonged nowhere else but here. When he stepped outside, the swing slowed. Mary glanced up, her eyes questioning the reason for his quiet stare. "He likes you," Tom said, easing himself onto the swing's other side. Mary looked down at Lucas, who had fallen asleep on her chest. "Babies know gentle hearts," she replied softly. "They know where they're safe." Tom swallowed. "You've given him more peace in a few weeks than I managed in months." Mary shook her head. "You gave him life. I only helped carry a little of it." Her humility stirred something powerful inside him. He'd known hard-working people, loyal people, even kind people, but Mary was something different. She gave without measuring, cared without expecting, loved without claiming. A cool breeze swept across the porch, and instinctively, Mary pulled the blanket tighter around Lucas. Tom watched her hands, steady, warm. "Sure, you're good for him," he said, quietly, "for both of us." Mary's breath caught, barely noticeable, but Tom saw it. She didn't answer, just lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing Lucas's cheek, overflowing with tenderness. "Mary," Tom said after a long silence, "I know you didn't come here planning to stay this long, but if you ever decide you want more time here with us, you'd be welcome." Mary's eyes lifted. Those soft brown irises held fear, hope, and a trembling uncertainty like someone standing on the edge of something they've wanted their whole life but never dared to reach for. "I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. "You aren't." Tom replied immediately, "You're a blessing." The swing creaked, the sky dimmed. The moment stretched between them like a held breath. In Mary's arms, the baby shifted, snuggling closer to her heart as if choosing her all over again. Tom wondered, not for the first time, if he was choosing her too. The storm arrived without warning, one of those sudden prairie tempests that swept in like an angry beast. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and the wind howled across the ranch, rattling windows and shaking the wooden porch. Lightning carved jagged lines through the darkness, turning the world white for heart-stopping moments. Tom was out in the barn checking on the horses when the thunder cracked so loudly it felt like the earth itself had split apart. Mary, holding Lucas inside the house, rushed to the window with worry tightening her chest. She wasn't afraid of storms, but she was terrified when people she cared for were caught in them. A few minutes passed. The rain grew heavier. Still no sign of Tom. Lucas began to cry, startled by the thunder. Mary soothed him, rocking him gently, whispering reassurances he was too young to understand, but comforted by anyway. But her own heart pounded with a fear she couldn't quiet. When another bolt of lightning struck, the entire ranch shuddering under its force, she made a decision without thinking. She wrapped Lucas in a thick shawl, tucked him securely against her chest, and ran out into the storm. The wind tore at her clothes, the rain soaking her instantly. Each step felt like pushing against a wall of water, but she pressed on toward the barn. "Tom," she called, her voice nearly swept away by the storm. "Tom, are you there?" A faint answer, strained, carried through the wind. "Mary, go back. It's not safe." But she didn't turn back. She followed the sound until she reached the barn door, which was half broken and swinging violently. Inside, Tom was struggling to secure a frightened horse whose reins had tangled around a beam. One wrong move, and both man and horse could be seriously hurt. "Why did you come out here?" Tom shouted, shocked to see her drenched and trembling. "You weren't coming back," Mary cried. "I thought something happened." "I couldn't. Just stay inside." Tom looked at her standing there in the storm, clutching his baby, risking her own safety to make sure he was alive. Something in him shifted, something deep and undeniable. "Get inside the barn," he ordered gently. "Stay near the wall. I'll fix this." But when the horse reared again, nearly knocking Tom over, Mary acted on instinct. She stepped forward, steady, humming something softly. A melody Tom had heard her sing to Lucas many times. The horse's ears twitched, its frantic movements slowing at the sound. Mary extended a hand, moving slowly. "Easy now," she whispered. "You're scared, I know." The horse unbelievably responded. It lowered its head, muscles relaxing, enough for Tom to free the reins. When the danger passed, Tom exhaled sharply, his breath shaking. He turned to Mary. She was soaked, shivering, and pale, but her eyes held a fierce determination he had never seen before. "You could have been hurt," he said, stepping close. "So could you," she replied. Their eyes locked, thunder rolling behind them. Tom reached out and gently brushed wet strands of hair from her face. It felt like the most natural thing he'd ever done. "You didn't have to come for me," he whispered. Mary's voice broke. "I did." For a long moment they stood there, storm raging around them, but a different kind of storm building between them, one made of unspoken feelings, shared needs, and hearts that had been circling each other for weeks. Lucas whimpered softly, breaking the moment. Mary held him closer, sheltering him with her body. "Let's go inside," Tom said, touching her elbow gently. "All of us." As they walked back to the house together, rain drumming on the roof, Tom realized something with absolute clarity. Mary wasn't just helping them, she was becoming part of them. And after tonight, he wasn't sure his heart or his home could ever let her go. The storm passed by morning, leaving the ranch washed clean and glistening under the soft gold of sunrise. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings, fresh, quiet, full of promise. Inside the house, everything felt different too, as if last night had shaken loose the final walls between Tom and Mary. Mary woke early, though she'd barely slept. The events of the storm kept replaying in her mind, Tom's fear for her, the horse calming to her voice, and the moment in the barn when he'd looked at her as if she were someone he couldn't afford to lose. It frightened her, but also warmed her in a way she hadn't felt in years. She moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast while Lucas babbled happily in his cradle. Tom came in a few minutes later, his hair still damp from washing, his shirt clean, but his eyes exhausted from a sleepless night. He paused in the doorway, watching Mary with a softness that made her cheeks flush. "You didn't rest," he said gently. "I could say the same about you," she replied. He smiled, faintly. Fair enough. For a few moments, they simply existed in the same space, comfortable, familiar, yet charged with something new. Tom stepped closer, hesitating only a second. "Mary, about last night. You don't have to explain," she interrupted quickly, her hands tightening on the apron she wore. "It was a frightening night. Emotions run high in storms. I don't want you to feel any obligation just because I helped." Tom's brows pulled together. "Is that what you think? That I feel obligated?" Mary lowered her gaze. "I don't. Want to be in the way? Or misread kindness?" Silence stretched between them until Tom crossed the room and gently lifted her chin with his fingers. "Mary, nothing about what I feel for you is obligation." Her breath caught before she could. "Speak!" Lucas let out a delighted squeal. Mary turned to him instinctively, but Tom stepped closer, standing beside her and watching the baby who had grown so attached to her. "He loves you," Tom murmured. Mary's voice trembled. "He loves everyone with warmth." "No," Tom said, softly, "he loves you differently. He looks for you first. He sleeps better in your arms. He smiles more with you." He paused, and "I do too." Mary went still. Tom took a breath, steady but nervous. "I've been trying not to push. I know your past wasn't easy. I know you carry hurt you rarely speak of, and I didn't want to make you feel trapped or obligated." He looked at her, with an honesty that made her heart begin to ache. "But last night, when you ran into that storm for me, I realized something. I don't want this house without you in it." Mary blinked rapidly, tears gathering in her eyes. "Tom, I'm not asking for an answer right away," he said, though the tremor in his voice revealed how much he cared. "But I need you to know that I want you here, as long as you'll stay, not as help, not as someone passing through." His voice softened into something fragile and hopeful. As family, Mary covered her mouth with her hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. For years, she had been drifting, offering pieces of herself with no place to rest. And now, here was a man offering her a home not out of need, not out of convenience, but out of genuine affection. She took a shaky breath. "Tom, you and Lucas have given me more peace than I've known in years. I didn't think I deserved." A place like this, Tom reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers with a careful, reverent touch. "Everyone deserves a place to belong, and you deserve to be loved." Mary's voice broke into a whisper. "So do you." Lucas gurgled happily, reaching toward them both, as if sensing the moment. Tom's eyes softened. "So, will you stay with us?" Mary looked from Tom to the baby, then back again at the man who had shown her gentleness, safety, and a future she never imagined. "Yes," she whispered, tears falling freely. "I'll stay." Tom pulled her into his arms carefully, gratefully as if embracing something precious he had searched for his whole life, and in that quiet kitchen, with sunlight spilling across the floor and Lucas giggling between them, their broken pieces finally found their place.